In 2005, I published a book entitled Manufacturing Discontent: The Trap of Individualism in a Corporate Society. I thought that the book was relevant to the way that the corporations were changing the way the political and economic agenda was being set. Unfortunately, the book sold fewer English language copies, than the Korean version. What I tried to do there was to show how this redefinition occurred, in the first place by teaching consumers that they were consumers, not workers, not citizens, but that people should identify as consumers. Of course, by identifying as consumers at a time when wages were not increasing, the results were fairly predictable. Another way in which the corporations or business society changed or redefined the landscape was the question of corporate accountability. Business went to great lengths in trying to remove any form of corporate responsibility. Trial lawyers became seen as a major branch of Al-Qaeda threatening to undermine American society. At the same time, the regulatory process was picking up speed, so that the public had few options to protect itself against corporate misdeeds. Of course, we saw with the 2007 collapse what these corporate misdeeds might look like. Another part of the book discussed risk. Here again, the subject was very relevant to what went on in the breakdown of the financial system. Business went to great lengths to redefine the nature of risk. They would find academic studies that would show that people were not very good at identifying risks. This is true. But they would use these studies in order to give a very warped definition or interpretation of what risk meant. People do misjudge risks, that's true. But the idea was anything that made people fearful was irrational. Nuclear power, unsafe food, or anything else that business did was ill-conceived because people had an inability to identify the real risks of various parts of society. What this did was to give further ammunition to the deregulatory process, and gave business cover in which they could say that any risks of whatever they were doing were absolutely irrational. You can see this playing out today in the question about fracking, in which hazardous chemicals are put into the water supply in order to release oil and water, but that this was perfectly safe and that any fears were irrational. Another way in which you could see how risk was being distorted was in terms of terrorism. Here, the public perception of risk was seen to be too slight. People must be made aware of how risky terrorist attacks are, and how terrorists are in our midst, everywhere, whether they wear turbans or not. The upshot of this was to increase the power of government in order to protect us against these risks, largely fictitious risks. At the same time, government was not to protect us against what business claimed were irrational risks. That is, in effect, the whole nature of risk was redefined in order to make the ability of business to do what it wants. Finally, people were to see themselves as citizens, as consumers rather than citizens, and this gave birth to George W. Bush's ownership society, which again played quite a role in building up to the recent crisis from which we have not yet emerged. Once business was able to redefine the political landscape and decide what was really dangerous, it developed the ability to frame what is or what is not dangerous, which is why I wanted to give this little talk today. One of the most outrageous risks that was presented as a horrendous danger was the government debt and deficit. And again, here you see risk was used, risk of an imaginary danger was used in order to reconfigure the whole political and economic landscape. And there was nobody in power that was able to come back and say, let's look rationally at what the risks are and what they're not. The precedent for this, of course, was discussed earlier in the book, which preceded all this, and that was business has become very adept at explaining to the public, often with little basis in fact, exactly what the political agenda would be, because only business is able to identify real risk from imaginary risk. Only business is able to explain the way the economy should work. Here again, the crisis is relevant because one of the reasons for the deregulation of the financial system was that business would somehow be able to eliminate all risk. That is, everybody could find a way to purchase a derivative or a credit default swap, and in this way, risk would be magically eliminated from the financial system. As a result, the need for regulation of the financial system was eliminated, and we all saw the result. I'm sorry that the book didn't get a better hearing. I think that it was something that could have had some effect if people had really been able to sit back and evaluate what was going on and why it was happening. But so far, this ability to reconfigure the political landscape has continued unabated. Why it would happen in the United States when in other countries people are angry and resisting, I don't know. But I do suspect that part of the answer was in the sophisticated way that the political and business establishment was able to redefine the political landscape. So anyway, thank you. I got to put this off my shoulders, and I'll hope to do this more often. Goodbye.